We are so glad that you are here today, worshiping with us, and we're in this series we're doing called Scandalous Grace and Radical Truth. You're not surprised by the idea of truth, that Jesus Christ would teach truth, that the whole narrative of the gospel is one of truth, and it is a revelation of what God has for us, what He longs for us, and it's the concept of truth. But grace is one, we've heard the phrase before, it's a Christian term, it's part of what marks the Christian church, the idea of grace. The word simply means unearned or unmerited favor. It's favor and relational presence and warmth that God gives us that isn't something we've worked for. We haven't earned it. It's that God has given it to us. That's grace. But part of what we're zeroing in on this teaching series is that there was in Jesus' life a scandalous level of grace. That He interacted with human beings as He met with people. This rabbi, this one that was so central in the Jewish faith, this idea of God's truth, He stepped into people's broken places with so much grace, so much mercy, so much unmerited, unearned favor, so much relational favor in their life that the religious leaders around Him thought He was being scandalous. It was in their eyes, almost blasphemous, and sometimes they called it blasphemous, how much mercy, how much relational presence He invested in people who were terribly far from God. That ought to give us good news, friends. Because I imagine, if you're like me, there's a lot of broken places in my story, in my journey, a lot of my own walk that has not been what God would have or God would desire. And Jesus Christ, God meets us in that broken place with scandalous levels of mercy. But in every one of those interactions, there was an overarching theme, a goal that you saw coming through super clearly. And in every person that Jesus interacted with at a scandalous level of grace, there was always a move, a desire, a pull, a call for them to be transformed. God meets us in that broken place, and His desire is to pull us from that broken place into something incredibly brand new. Think about the man he had leprosy. Back then, it was a terribly feared disease, dread disease. It would eat away at the skin and the muscles and bones, and they didn't know what was causing it. And so everybody was required to quarantine away from people with leprosy. You guys remember quarantines, don't you? Just a couple years ago, you were afraid to walk past somebody in the grocery store because you were going to catch something and keel over dead, right? We had a lot of fear, and for good reason. It was a dread disease. At least we knew what it was. Back then they didn't. And so there was a lot of fear. And so the person who had leprosy, they had to walk around wearing a sign that said unclean. And they had to cry out if anybody got close to them, unclean, unclean, and everybody would stay away. Except Jesus meets that man and walks right over to him and touches him. I'm visualizing He embraces him. And the crowd gasps, right? What Jesus was after in that transformation is don't be alone, brother. You're not alone. While everybody else is afraid of you and everybody is, doesn't know how to treat this brokenness in your life. For me, you matter. I'm coming in. No matter the risk, do not be alone. That's the transformation He was looking for. Zacchaeus was a tax collector. We've talked about him. He was a crook. He was a thief. He would rob from the poor, empty their entire savings accounts to pad his own wallet and his own wealth and so forth. And Jesus sees Zacchaeus watching him from afar. He was a shorter fellow, and so he had climbed a tree to be able to see Jesus amongst all the crowds. And Jesus walking past sees him, and everybody knows who this guy is. He's a scoundrel. He's a crook. He would be like a mafia boss in our day, right? And Jesus sees him in a tree and says, "Hey, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house for dinner tonight." And the crowd gasps. "Rabbi, you're going with that guy? That freak, that scoundrel? Do you know the drinking and the cussing and the abusing going on? Jesus, does it not matter to you that he is robbed from the poor? Doesn't it? You're going to go have dinner with the guy?" But Jesus was after his transformation. Zacchaeus, no matter how dark or twisted it is what you're doing, you need to be loved. And you need to come into relationship with the people of God. Because Jesus knew the transformation that would happen is you begin to make it right with people. And he did. Over that dinner, Zacchaeus stands up and he says, you know what? I'm going to come clean and I'm going to make it right. And if I've robbed anybody, I'm paying them back 2 or 3 times. And it was a transformational moment because Jesus stepped in with scandalous levels of grace. And he met him and he changed him. We could go on and on and on. A woman at the well, a woman so broken in her relationships, been through 5 marriages, living now with a guy she's not married to. And Jesus, his transformational call to her is be known for who you are. Let your story be safe in the community of God's people and be changed as a result. Last week, we looked at a woman caught in the very act of adultery, brought in front of Jesus, and they wanted to stone her to death as the law required. But his answer was, I'm not going to condemn you. And he could do that because of his own sacrifice on the cross. He said, I'm not going to condemn you. And challenged everybody else. You want to throw a stone at her, the person who's never sinned, go for it. And none of them could. And Jesus says, I'm not condemning you, but go and leave your life of sin. Be transformed. Every scandalous relationship Jesus had, it was rooted in the pursuit of transformation. So here's my question for us this morning. What do you need transformed in? Where do you need transformation? My hunch is in a crowd like this that many of us, or maybe most of us, the circumstances are not nearly so dire, right? There's probably not a mafia boss in the room. If there is, be transformed, right? There may not be someone here being unfaithful. There may not be a person here who's in such relational chaos. There might be in a crowd this size. There may be places and pockets where the brokenness is as dire or as deep. But friends, just because maybe some of you here are living a goody two-shoes life and you've got yourself pretty cleaned up doesn't mean there isn't need for transformation. Am I right? Am I in the right place? Amen. But there are places of bitterness or of unforgiveness or places of self-hatred or places of hardness. What is the place you need transformed? I bet your spouse could tell you that are married. Maybe your coworkers could tell you. You get a little too abrasive at work. Or maybe you're prone towards a little bit of arrogance in your life. Or maybe money matters too much to you. Or maybe that wound you experienced, you just cannot let it go. These are all things we need transformed. And as we learned last week, when Jesus looked at the woman and he said, who condemns you? And they'd all left because everybody had finally figured out we're all sinners. Everybody's in the same boat. And there's nobody there left to condemn her. And he says, neither will I condemn you, but go and leave your life of sin. Friends, this is the most important thing you'll hear all day. I promise you, way more important than anything you'll hear on CNN or Fox News today. Here's the most important words ever going to cross your eyes today. It's this: no condemnation is the required backdrop for any transformation, for you living a life of holiness. No condemnation. Jesus says, I do not condemn you. No condemnation. It's the required backdrop for any transformation. Why? Because if we understand Jesus looks at you, he looks at me, and he says, no condemnation for your sin, it can lead to change. Why? Because it moves the work, it moves the effort of transformation squarely where it belongs, which is in the cross of Jesus Christ, his sacrifice for you and me, him taking the penalty of our sins. It moves the work into the cross, not our own efforts. If you understand, Jesus said, I'm not going to condemn you because I'm going to take the penalty of your sin. I'm going to the cross. You don't have to pay it. So now, with that foundation of no condemnation, now go live a different life. That is necessary. We understand that. It moves it. Where's the work coming from? Where's the effort? How am I going to be different? It's going to be because of what Jesus Christ has done for me. Does this make sense? With me? Y'all are quiet this morning. All right, grab your Bibles. If you didn't bring a Bible, you've got a red one in the pew right in front of you. We're going to Hebrews chapter 5. If you're unfamiliar using one of the red pew Bibles, it's page 1187, Hebrews chapter 5. So we have no way today to get into the depth of the complexity of the book of Hebrews. It's way more complex than we can tackle today. But let me just kind of give you what this book is about. It's written to the Jewish people. It's why it's called the book of Hebrews. Hebrews and and Jews, same, just different interchangeable words. But these Jews were Jews who had followed Jesus Christ and were trusting in Jesus Christ. Today, in our context, we would call them Messianic Jews. There are many of them who believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and so they are very, very Jewish in all their traditions and so forth, but they believe in Jesus. And so this book is written to that crowd 40, 50 years after the life of Jesus. And we don't know who wrote the book of Hebrews. It's a very complex book, but it unpacks and pulls out very, very critical theology. And here's what you need to understand about Hebrews. The basic message of this book is all about the absolute sufficiency of the cross. That Jesus' sacrifice for your sin and mine, him trading places with us, our brokenness, his life, our sin, his perfection, traded in the spiritual realms, the sufficiency of the cross, that's what this book is about, and the stern warning, one of the sharpest warnings in all the New Testament, the stern warning that anything other than that, any religious activity, any religious tradition trying to earn your way into relationship with God, any of that is actually a rejection of Jesus and will cost you your salvation. Slow down, y'all. Hold the phone. You with me? This is important. This book is about the sufficiency of the cross of Jesus Christ, and to trust in any other source of transformation is to reject Jesus and lose your salvation. So y'all believers, sit up straight, pay attention. This is good stuff, right? Gordon, they're really quiet this morning. I know. Going deep. All right, so here's what we're going to do. It's very complex. We can't get into the complexity. So sometimes you need to just kind of read something, but then read it backwards, read it out of order. I spent a bunch of hours this week reading through the book of Hebrews, and it was just really flat. I think I wrote about that to you guys on Friday. I was struggling to break through and so forth. And so I stepped back and I looked at these verses that God was drawing me to that we're going to look at today. And what I did is I started at the end and worked my way backwards. And it's kind of like going counterclockwise, working your way backwards through this. And we're going to do that this morning. And you're going to want your Bibles open. So I really want you guys to highlight this stuff. Can I do a rabbit trail real quick? Just quick poll. And you guys that are guests don't feel like you got to participate in this, but you guys, regulars around here, Mount Hope people that love me and trust me, even though you're looking at me like, where's he going? Just show of hands, how many of you have a physical copy of the Bible that you use regularly, not your phone, not your tablet? Let me see your hands. Okay. Could I move that to 100% of you guys? Now, let me ask you this. How many of you bring that physical copy with you to church every Sunday morning? Fewer of you. All right. I'm serious. As your pastor, please bring a physical copy of the Bible with you. You need this. I want you guys to have this open and soak in it. Let the Holy Spirit lead you beyond my words. This is more than a video game. This is more than a smartphone app. This is more, the Word of God is living and active. So a little shepherding moment for you guys. If you don't have a Bible, take one of the red ones. Take it home. It's yours. We got boxes of them in the back, right? Okay, you guys with me? Gordon, they're even quieter. I don't know what's going on here. All right. I know, because you're right there. All right, Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7. Let's look at this. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. Are you hearing this pathos here? That while Jesus is alive, while he's living here on earth, he's crying out to God, loud cries, tears. And he was heard, the scriptures say here, because of his reverent submission, that he was in a posture of submission to God, and God is interacting with him and listening to him, and we see that throughout his ministry. Verse 8, although he was a son, he was the Son of God, although he was a son, he learned obedience from what he suffered, and once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. Now notice this, look at this. Does something here strike you odd? If you know anything about Jesus, you know the Bible teaches us that he lived a life that was completely without sin. He was the most perfect human being to ever live. And I've never achieved anything anywhere near Jesus' life. I imagine neither have you. He was the most perfect human being. And yet, notice this, verse 8, it says he learned obedience through what he suffered. Now, what does that mean, that he learned obedience? If he was already perfect, if he was already sinless, if he'd never been disobedient to God, what's this whole thing of him learning obedience? Well, here's what I think's going on here. The Bible tells us he is God in the flesh, that before he came to earth through the virgin birth, he lived as God in the eternities. Philippians tells us his identity as God. It's not something he clung to. He humbled himself. And as divinity, he had never he'd never previously had to obey. He'd never faced temptation before. He'd never faced struggle before. This is part of the beauty of the incarnation, that God would step into our story. This is part of the scandal, in fact, that God would step so far into our story as human beings that he would face temptation. And he would struggle, and he would have to learn how to obey. And you notice how he goes about this? It's loud tears and crying and pain. Loud cries and tears. Now this verse kind of stood out to me this week, that this is where Jesus was for us. Learning obedience, and once made perfect, once he's made perfect, he's able to be the author of our salvation. Are you seeing this? So then let's take that verse and let's orbit out just a little further. Let's go to verse 1 of chapter 5. So we're going backwards. We're rewinding the clock. Well, where's this coming from? Chapter 5, verse 1 tells us that every high priest is selected from among men and is appointed to represent them in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. Now pause here. What he's talking about is in the Jewish worship system. The priest would be the one who would meet between you and God. He was a broker, if you will, brokering the relationship between you and God. Some of you come from church traditions that have priests. You might think of me in that role as someone who's going to stand and represent you before God. Now, the beauty that we're going to discover in this is that Jesus becomes the ultimate high priest, and you don't need a man to stand between you and God. This is the whole teaching of Hebrews, is that Jesus himself has become that priest. He's the one who's going to broker the relationship between you and God. In your brokenness, he's going to stand there. Now, what the Hebrews writer is saying here is he's saying the value, the imagery of the priest, the good part of this. Look at this in verse 2, that this priest is able to deal gently. Catch that? He's able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and who are going astray, since he himself is subject to weakness. This is why he, the priest, the ordinary priest, has to offer sacrifices for his own sins. So, when I go before God to pray on your behalf and pray for you, I'm a sinner. I got my junk, and so I got to work out my own relationship with God, and then I also pray with you and pray for you, and you do the same thing. So Jesus is going to become the high priest, and the concept of a priest is that he is gentle. The priest is able to be gentle because in most cases, priests have their own struggles. Well, where's this? What are we learning here? We learn just a few verses later that Jesus himself had to learn obedience. He had to struggle through your junk. That he is able to be a gentle priest. He's able to be one to stand between you and God. How do you spell priest? There you go. I don't spell in front of people. He was able to be a gentle priest because he had suffered. Do you see this? He'd suffered for you. Jameson, they're being awful quiet this morning. Are y'all having fun? All right, let's go. Chapter 4, we're going backwards, right? Rewinding the clock. Chapter 4, verse 14. He says, we have a great high priest. He's gone through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. So let us hold firmly to the faith that we possess, for we do not, catch this, we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. Did you catch it? He's able to be gentle because he's not unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. We have one who's been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he was without sin. Slow down. Every way that you've been tempted. Friends, this is part of the scandal. I've not been tempted with everything that you have. I've been tempted with some things. My brokenness, I have a tendency towards arrogance. I have a tendency towards thinking I'm smarter than everybody else in the room, and I'm not. But sometimes I think I am. I get in arguments with people, and I'm going to win at whatever cost. That's my temptation. My wife doesn't have that temptation. She's the opposite. Like, you guys know my wife. She's not an arrogant person in the least, right? I won't tell you what hers are. She can fess up for herself. Right, smart. My moment of wisdom. I was going to go, I can tell you what they are, but I won't. Thanks for saving me, brother. But you see, it's like we have different temptations. Some of you here have battled with substance abuse, and others have never been interested. Some of you are consumed with lust, and others are not. And you might be tempted to think, oh, well, I'm the bad guy in the room because I struggle with this, and so doesn't. When reality is, okay, so I struggle with arrogance, Sherry does not. Sherry has her own struggles. Ask her about them, she'll tell you. Or not. You see this? Oh, but friends, catch this. The scriptures record that Jesus Christ was tempted in every way. The Holy God, now embodying a human being, fighting the battle with substance abuse, fighting the battle with lust, fighting the battle with greed, feeling that greed rising in him, and saying, no, I'm going to obey God. Loud cries and tears. I'm going to fight. Fighting the battle over self-hatred and doubt. Do you see this? Pick the worst sin you could ever imagine, the one that you see in your life as the worst, or somebody else's life. You go, geez, at least I'm not like that guy. Jesus was tempted with that too. And friends, that's the scandal, that Jesus has been in all of it. So we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with us, but rather we have one who's been tempted in every way we are. Now, he overcame it. He did it without sin. But look at that, verse 16. What do we do with this? Then, let us then approach the throne of grace. Let us approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Are you with me, friends? How many non-believers are living their lives, or even Christians who are living their lives completely far from God, and we talk about this all the time. They say, I can't come to your church. The place will burn down when I walk in, right? Because their imagery of God is that God is so grossed out by your struggle that he's just waiting to burn you when he can. That's the image non-believers have of the church. Where'd they get it? Well, they probably got it from preachers like me yelling at folks. But the imagery is that God hates me. No, he doesn't. He's been there. He's able to be a gentle priest because he has fought with his loud cries and tears, which has enabled him to live with an amazing amount of sympathy that is an invitation. It's an invitation into the presence of God. Come meet with God. Come be in his presence. Come face to face with him. He gets the struggle. He's not grossed out by it. He's not surprised by it. He's not freaked out by it. He was there when you did it last time anyway. He's sitting right there having a cup of coffee going, gee, I wish you could be transformed, but I love you enough. I'll pay for all of it, right? This is who Jesus Christ is. Whew, I'm having fun. All right, let's go. Back one more verse, go over to chapter 2. You're backing up, chapter 2. So just a couple pages to the left. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. Do you see how we're unwinding this? We're building the case. We're going to look at another passage. What is Jesus doing here? Verse 14 of Hebrews 2. Since the children, that's you and me, since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity. He stepped into our humanity so that by his death, he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and that he could free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. He wants to set you free. For surely it's not angels he helps, but it's Abraham's descendants, you and me. And for this reason, so he could help us, for this reason, he had to be made like his brothers, like his sisters in every way. He had to step into your story, into your scandal, into your brokenness, be tempted in every way that you are. He had to step into that in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he's able to help those who are being tempted. He can help. No matter where you are, no matter how ugly it is, no matter how painful it is, no matter how broken it is, no matter how disgusting you think it may be, he can help. Why? Because he's wired with sympathy, inviting you into the presence of God. How's he able to do that? Well, he's a gentle priest. How's he able to be a gentle priest? I thought he was this perfect God. How can he be gentle? Well, because he's had to struggle with it in his own loud tears and his own crying. He's had to fight through these issues in his own life. Is this making sense, friends? Reading this backwards, is this helping? Yes. I could have just read this text straight through and you'd be like, okay, long text. But when you wind it backwards, we got one more. Chapter 2, verse 10. Look at it. Oh, I love this. Hebrews 2, verse 10. In bringing many sons, many daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the author of their, that's us, of our salvation perfect through suffering. Did you catch that? It was fitting. Like this is how it needed to be. This is the right thing. It was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the author of our salvation perfect through suffering, so that both the one who makes men and women holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call you his brother, his sister. He's one of us. It was fitting. This is the only way it's going to work. It's the only way you and I are ever going to make a relationship with God, is that he would become like us. And it was fitting that he would be made perfect through suffering. Did you catch that? Jesus was imperfect. The perfect God, the perfect holy God, the one who'd never sinned, was not completely perfect until he had struggled through the suffering, until he had faced the temptation, until he had learned how to be obedient. And the reason that is what needed to happen, the reason that's what's fitting, is so that the one who's going to make you holy, the one who's going to do the work to clean up your life, the one who's going to do the work to bring about transformation, and you who are getting transformed, we're of the same family. This isn't a distant, far off God. It's our brother. It's God who has stepped into brotherhood with us. He's going to be able to make us holy because he's walked in it right there with us. And friends, here's the thing, we're going to see this, that his perfection equals his suffering. That's where his perfection came from. The fact that he suffered for you and me. Wow. That this is how God would orchestrate the whole story, the whole narrative, knowing that you and I are going to be screw-ups. Of course we are. We're human beings. We're made of flesh and blood. And God said, I know that's not going to work out so good. You guys are going to eat the apple and you're going off the cliff. It's coming, right? And so the whole plan from the beginning is Jesus saying, I'm in the game. I'm going to step in and I'm going to stand in your place. And friends, the real story here is that Jesus worked super hard for you. He has worked super hard on your behalf. Do you see it, friends? There's a new thought. You get the scandal that Jesus would be tempted in everything. That's pretty scandalous. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 21 tells us he even literally became sin. He became the embodiment of it. When all of our sin was poured on him on the cross, he cried out in shock and horror, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Because in that moment, like a cesspool of sewage, all the wrongs of any human being ever lived dumped upon him. And it's like, whoa, he'd never known sin, but now he's tasting it. Friends, that's a scandal that God would step into that mess for you and me. And you get that what we've been talking about, his ability now to help us is that he's been in that struggle. But here's a new thought. Jesus worked super hard for us. He suffered loud tears, crying. His perfection came from his suffering. Is it possible that you and me, in our relationship of getting a breakthrough to be close to God, might call upon us to engage a little bit of suffering of our own? That real spiritual formation, real transformation costs you. It's not easy. It's hard. It asks us to hurt in some places, to give up some selfishness, to give up some of the ground that we want. You know, our society these days is all about, hey, whatever you want, just do it. Whatever you want to be, just be it. And there may be some places where that beckoning of our society to just live however you want to live might be actually taking us away from spiritual closeness with God, because there are some times when what we need, to be obedient, to learn obedience as Jesus would. Jesus suffered. He cried a lot. It was hard for him. Is it possible it might be hard for you and me too? I know that does not play well to an American audience, because we are the chief society of pain avoidance. All right, so we say, Chris, what in the world do I do with this? So what? Well, let's look at one more verse. Go backwards one more. Chapter 2, verse 1. All of this, as we unwound it, if we read through it in order, it starts with this teaching. Verse 1, we must pay more careful attention to what we've heard so that we do not drift away. For if the message spoken by angels is binding, every violation, disobedience receives its just punishment. How? In other words, the angels are, God deals with angels without any grace, right? It's pretty hard on them. Well, then how shall we escape if we ignore such a great salvation? See, our salvation, friends, is based on grace. It's based on Jesus Christ working super hard for us. But if we just take that and say, oh, isn't that cool? Jesus loves me. Jesus has forgiven me. I've got grace. And that's where we stop. And that's all we do. Are we at risk of ignoring this great salvation? He says, this is the so what? Pay more careful attention. So what does that look like in your life? And it's going to be different based on who you are and what your struggle is. Right? For some of us here, it may be that we've got some shame struggles in our life. So for the person with shame, here's what this looks like. Do you see how hard Jesus has worked for you? If your struggle is shame and your inability to forgive yourself and to break through into freedom, do you see Jesus has suffered so hard to purchase that? So can that help you receive his grace and live in it? If Jesus suffered all this to get you free, and you say, yeah, but you don't know what I did. Yeah, no, but he does. He was tempted with it, and he struggled with it. See, friends, to not forgive ourselves is to diminish the power of the cross. It's to say that wasn't sufficient. To not walk in forgiveness is to doubt that what Jesus suffered on our behalf wasn't enough. And we owe God something ourselves. So if you could see this, would that set you free from shame? Maybe shame's not your thing. Maybe you're one who's presently avoiding God for any number of reasons. You're mad at God, or you feel like you've screwed up too much, or whatever. Do you see in this the bold invitation into the presence of God? that because he's a faithful high priest, he's able to be sympathetic to us. So, therefore, let us come boldly into the presence of God, boldly into the throne of God's grace. Can you start seeking God? If you're avoiding God, could you start seeking him? Because he's invited you in with all his heart. Maybe shame, maybe avoiding God isn't your issue. Maybe you're distracted. Maybe you're complacent, right? This is probably me right now. I wrote to you about it on Friday, struggling with a little bit of complacency, right? So, and for me, it's really rooted in distraction, right? So it may be a better phrase to say for the distracted or the complacent. Do you see God's passion for you? Do you see how hard he's worked for you, for your spiritual formation? So could your hunger for God be reignited? Let me linger here for a minute. Most of you guys know we lost my dog 2 weeks ago, and I know for others of you have been through some loss way bigger than that, right? So not saying this for your sympathy, but just to talk about it. All right, so this was a hard couple of weeks, right? A lot of grieving going on in our family. And that had me distracted. And I shared this with our small group on Monday, that one of the recognitions of the sin struggle for me right now, these days, is when I'm in pain, whether it be grieving loss of a beautiful little puppy dog, or whether it's some other source of pain, a relational pain. Right now, my modality is to go into my hobbies or other things that I enjoy, or overindulging in YouTube videos, or spending too much time on Facebook. I'm rather than like getting before God and worshiping him. Because worshiping God right now is the last thing I wanted to do. I'm distracted, I'm hurt, I'm angry, and I don't want to worship, right? But I know that worshiping God, seeking the face of God, would bring me way more joy than YouTube or Facebook, right? But I don't want to do it. When I see this, could it draw me to reignite that hunger and thirst for God? Maybe you're the pain avoidant here. Maybe you're the American who says, I want my life to be all polished and perfect. Well, what do I do with this? It's what I asked just a minute ago. Are you willing to work as hard as Jesus did for your own spiritual formation? What does that look like? It probably means investing more time in prayer. It probably means investing in a physical copy of the Bible. And don't just say, no, I'll just do it on my phone. No, really get in the Word for real. Jump in, study the Scriptures. It means pouring in time and energy into the presence of God. That hurts. That costs. Yes, it does. But Jesus worked pretty hard for us. You willing to go that hard for him? Look at that list. And ask, God, am I one of these things? If you're not, if this isn't your present struggle, then there might be many others. Let's ask God right now, Father, in the name of Jesus, would you reveal the so what? What do I do with this scandalous grace of you stepping in to my story? What do I do with this? And would you, friends, would you, with your heart, your soul, would you hear the gentle priest who says, I know, I understand the struggle. I know what you're fighting through. But would you come on? Would you come into my presence? Would you trust me? Would you approach me? Would you seek me? Would you pour energy into this relationship? Because I'm fighting really hard on your behalf. Ryan, worship team, you guys come on up. Friends, it's about to get really good. We're going to be done in about 5 minutes. And this is going to be good. Here's what we want to ask you to do. You got it. Thank you, John. We've got a new song for you this morning. You'll pick it up pretty quick. And there's a line in the song, the grave no longer tells me who I am. The grave no longer tells me who I am. The brokenness in my life, the places where I feel chained, this no longer tells me who I am. You know who tells me who I am? Do you know what tells me who I am? It's the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, that he has raced into your story on your behalf. He has grabbed a hold of you. He has pursued you. He has worked really hard for you, sweat, bled, cried for you. That's who you are, is his beloved. He's coming after you. So here's what I want to ask you to do do, these next 3 or 4 minutes before we're done, would you, with all your heart, would you express faith in that? Would you reach out to God in faith to celebrate who he's made you to be and step towards him? Do the next thing, whatever it is, step towards him in the name of Jesus Christ. Let's stand, friends. Let's stand and let's give God our all. Let's go. And so, Father, we thank you. We thank you for that freedom, that transformation that was purchased by your effort on our behalf. So, God, help us this week race towards you in that. Help us accept that invitation into your presence with all of our junk and all of our stuff, that we would be changed by this grace. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.